Hey, everybody. Welcome to Resiliency Radio, your go-to podcast for the most cutting-edge insights in integrative and functional medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Jill, and with each episode, we dive into the heart of healing and personal transformation. Join me as we interview thought leaders, medical experts, and people of all types and backgrounds with interesting tidbits to help you on your journey for optimal performance and longevity. Today's no different. Have you been told to restrict foods because of a food allergy test? Or have you been restricting foods and you just find the box is getting smaller and smaller and smaller so that you're down to 4 or 5 or 10 foods that you feel like you can eat without reacting? Today, we're going to bust the myth that you have to continue restricting foods in order to get well. And we're going to talk about skin conditions like eczema and atopic illnesses. And you will not want to miss this incredible interview with Christa Biegler. So stay tuned. Before we jump into the interview, I just want to share with you, we have lots of products and services that are specially curated. And today's episode in particularly, you may want to check out my antihistamine products, my mast cell bundle, and you can find all of that at drjillhealth.com. Again, drjillhealth.com. You can also find natural beauty products that are incredible for skin health and anti-aging. And one thing I want to be sure and mention today is our Beauty Collagen. This product is one of my very favorites for hair, skin, and nails. I take a scoop and put it into my coffee every single morning. It is one of our best sellers, and I just feel like I cannot go a day without it. It's loaded with peptides and collagen and silica and the things that your skin needs to be optimal glowing, and your nails need to be strong. I have the strongest nails I've ever had in my life since I've been taking this. So find this at drjillhealth.com. Now, I also want to mention, I don't know if you know, but I actually have a clinical practice near Boulder, Colorado, and we are accepting new patients. So if you're out there struggling with mast cell activation, with chronic complex illness of any type, we are taking new patients. I have a nurse practitioner and a PA that are mentored by me and work together with me on cases, and we are accepting clients. So if you are interested in becoming a patient, feel free to call the office at 303-993-7910 or send an email to ask@flatironfunctionalmedicine.com. Okay, let me introduce our guest. Christa Biegler is an author, podcast host, and private practice owner helping with health-savvy women overcome eczema, food sensitivities, and fatigue without unnecessarily restricting endless testing and supplements. She has a passion for subclinical thyroid issues, nervous system, and stealth biotoxins, and she lives in the Midwest with her unicycling husband and children. You're going to love this episode with Christa. And let's get to the show. Christa, I am so excited to be here on one of my favorite topics. We're going to talk about food sensitivities, and I want to also talk about skin, which many people may be like, what are those two doing in the same conversation? But all of it relates to our gut. So we're going to dive deep. If you're listening and want to know more, please stay tuned. Listen till the end because you're going to get some real good pearls for yourself or someone you know who is suffering. But let's start with your journey because it sounds like you've had some of your own experiences with this, and that often drives our passion and purpose. Tell me a little bit more about how you got into this field.
Yeah, accidentally as usual, right? And as a dietitian by trade, I thought it was pretty cool to change your diet and to get to see different things happen. And so I got into food sensitivity work, kind of a certification and that kind of work about 10-ish years ago when it was, I feel, very popular at the height. Everyone was talking about that. And my journey was a little bit different. It was interesting. When I first started doing that work with clients, it was all going quite well. But for me, I had a different experience, a lot like some clients have, where the food sensitivity results showed that I was reacting to everything that I was eating, which sent me into an emotional spiral of I'll just stick that on the fridge and deal with it later. Shortly after that, I mean, it's a bit of a blur, but around that same time, I ended up with what I would call my first big health crisis, which I woke up one morning. It's funny because it's like, did I really wake up one morning and that's exactly how it went down? So I woke up one morning and my face and my neck were covered in a rash. Now the trigger, there's always a triggering event
Yeah.
very often, right? And so the trigger was 5 days straight at the swimming pool with my kids. Unusual for me because I used to think I had genetic, quote unquote, dry skin that only presented in the winter, and I never really had a problem, right? It wasn't causing enough issue for
Yeah.
me to think it was abnormal at that time. And it wasn't causing enough stress. But I woke up that morning, I was dealing with a career change, a couple of kids, right? Like all those stresses that sort of let things happen. And
Yeah.
so to kind of tie it all into a bow, I was looking for help with skin stuff, struggling. And at the time, I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to go do this food sensitivity protocol. It was a month after I did the results, which is a terrible whole idea in the first place. And now I'm not even into this at all. So we'll talk about how this all comes
Yeah.
360 or 180. But essentially, what happened was I went under the food sensitivity protocol. I didn't see a massive difference, a little bit, but what was really striking to me was actually kind of created food sensitivities that weren't there before. So specifically, I was at the end of a couple week period, and if you don't plan when you change your diet, you're going to be hungry, and when you're
Yes.
hungry, nothing is good, right? And so these are just real things. Like everyone is a human, and these are real human experiences that we live through. And I remember sticking my hand in a bag of pecans because I was going through the pantry like a raccoon looking for something I could eat. And I remember my eye swelling from eating these pecans. And I'd never had any kind of
Yeah.
reaction to that, like that, to anything before. And so, this is not such an unusual story. You've seen this many times where it's like, okay, everything is dysregulated. The immune system was
Yeah.
literally having a freak out, and I created more problems by going into restriction mode. So that was kind of the beginning of that story. And the bridge in the middle is it was really hard to find people who knew much about skin stuff. And so as
Yeah.
much as I tried not to work with skin issues for a number of years, people just kept coming to me for it because when you have a personal experience around it, you're pretty,
Yeah.
it's just different. It hits different, right? And so, and I could talk about this topic endlessly and I have lots of opinions about it, and what actually works well and what does not work well. And I love to be as generous as possible with it because we are it's an underserved area,
Yeah.
right? And it's a really common issue. And so if we can try to help people get results faster around so I love people to have a free life and enjoy food and enjoy birthday cake. Like those are real things that I'm really in love with. But people always came for skin issues, and these things are just tied together, right?
Yes.
So usually
Yeah.
if you're having skin stuff, you think, or you might be having, or whatever, you might be having some type of food reaction. It's part of the entire conversation. It's even part of the atopic march, right? Like allergies versus sensitivity. So allergies, asthma, eczema, all part of they go together, all immune issues in general. And so, of course, not surprisingly, that was my first health journey 10 years ago. Of course, we have a cascade of health journeys in our
Yes.
overall
And
journey
it's
in
like,
general.
okay, what next, right? No,
Yeah, right.
I,
Stress hormones. Broke myself with fasting, but that's a
yeah,
different story for a
yeah.
different day.
And again, we'll tie all this together if you're listening, like, okay, how'd that all connect? I really love this personally because I grew up on a farm and unbeknownst to me, I had incredible toxicity, leaky gut, and severe eczema, as you can imagine. Um,
Yeah,
I literally would scratch myself at night, so my sheets would be bloody in the morning because I'd scratched so hard and so bad, and the dryness and all that. So I also, unbeknownst, and this was like at 5, 8, 10, 12, like young, not knowing that was just to me it was just normal. And then of course
yeah,
my mom tried to help, and we go to the doctor and I get steroid creams, which didn't really help the root
right.
cause. So I have lived that. And then with my Crohn's and celiac and all that, I know a lot of how this is all connected. But let's hear from you. I think you have been such a voice in this area and so important. And the truth is, people out there listening are struggling, and they maybe don't know it's related to the gut. But let's kind of frame this deeper in balance. Like, how could the gut, the immune system, the liver, these things that are underlying, maybe you start to kind of frame the underlying root causes of how someone could present with atopic issues or rashes or eczema.
hmm There's multiple ways we can go about it. And if you don't mind, in a bit, I'd love to share kind of something I've come up with for categorizing
Sure.
it because I generally think that we try to treat it all the same. First, so I'm going to answer your question. First, I want to bridge something you said. One of the issues is that, unfortunately, for this specific issue, our toolbox is so shallow. It's just steroids and then
Yeah.
biologics. And people
Right.
say, that's it.
Right.
What? Right? And then we generally do not agree about the other root causes, but actually something we do agree about universally, conventionally, and holistically, functionally, whatever, is a presence of low-grade infection.
Hmm.
And I think this is important because one of the areas of relapse is the common cold. So sometimes you'll be clear and then you'll have a cold and then you'll be like, where did these symptoms come from?
Yeah.
Low grade infection. And so we universally agree that there's a Staphylococcus aureus overgrowth with skin issues. And so the skin grows from the inside out. And so when we're trying to treat it, and that makes sense to people if you really think
Yeah.
about it, right? It's like, oh, of course. And so very commonly, if you go to a dermatologist, one of the treatments, I guess we have a few more treatments that they recommend. They might recommend a bleach bath, right? Which is an antimicrobial dunk.
Yeah.
Essentially, there's other ways you could do that without bleach, but they'll recommend that because they're trying to control the overall bacterial overgrowth on the skin in
Mhm.
general, right? And so when we have this kind of low-grade infection, when we kind of go to the more the functional or holistic version of this, we kind of look at an overall terrain, an overall microbiome, right? So it could be bacterial overgrowth, it could be fungal overgrowth. As you are very aware, mold is a huge driver just because it's a more aggressive
Yeah.
fungus, it's a more aggressive toxin. And then also you can have parasitical things driving. I mean, it's sort
Yeah.
of the gamut in my opinion. And whether we like it, like we like testing, but not every test is going to show anything. So
Mhm.
we arrive at lots of opinions about that. It would be, we all want a quick, easy button for
Yes.
everything. And what I would say is, in general, the terrain is out of balance. So your question was, how does that affect the gut and the immune system? Essentially, I like to think about it. There's an image I have in my head from immunologist Dr. Samuel Yannick. And when I first saw this image, I thought, oh, this is exactly how I'm practicing. Thank you for putting it into an image for me. I appreciate this. And so there's a circle in the middle that says inflammation. And
Yeah.
then there's all these little circles that are filling the inflammatory bucket. And so one of them is overall dysbiosis or imbalance that we just talked about, those microbial overgrowth. So we generally agree about it, but we don't agree
Mhm.
about it completely. And if you go and try to get a topical culture for fungus, apparently, according to dermatologists I've interviewed, they say not always accurate. So we can talk about some
Yes.
of that too, because these pieces, it's the nuance that's
Yes.
important, right? Because we'll get stuck on, well, I had a swab and they said there was no problem. Like, well, let's discuss. Okay,
Yes.
so there's the image of the inflammation. Inflammation is just an umbrella term, right? It's a full bucket, as you have probably described here. And so we've got our overgrowth of bacteria, organisms, etc. And then the other big circle, which I think is really important, is we've got stress chemistry.
Yeah.
And so we've got what's going on in the nervous system also talks to the overall immune system. And then there's a bunch of other inputs, detox issues, et cetera, what is going on in the environment, other things. They're kind of like little line items. We can make them all the same circle, but all of these are filling that inflammatory bucket. That inflammation is talking to the immune system. It's throwing the immune system out of balance, Th1, Th2 dominant balance. It's triggering other inflammatory mediators. And then you're going to start to see essentially exacerbation of immune stuff. And different immune exacerbations look differently, but the
Mhm.
one I most commonly see is this atopic look list, like asthma,
Yeah.
allergies, sinus, eczema, etc. More so than there's some different presentations, but that's the one I more commonly see. So that's how I like to think about it. So yes, the gut is a huge part of it, and so there's so much to unwrap with the gut, and then automatically because the skin is a drainage
Yeah.
organ, what's going on with drainage as a whole is a huge conversation as well. So those are two of the systems, but there's another system as well that's involved.
I love it. Well, let's dive into that next. But I think it's so critical for people to understand that often at the root is you'd be surprised, but your gut drains into the liver, and the liver, when it's overloaded, presents on the skin. And so this is all connected, as you so well eloquently talked about. And often, like you said, doctors, for example, you mentioned mold or yeast cultures. When we do that for sinuses or gut, it takes about 30 days in the right culture to grow these things out. And even then, often that mold or yeast or fungi will not grow. So it's extremely common. I would guess clinically, this is not evidence-based, just my clinical experience, maybe 80% of those people who really have fungal issues will not have a positive culture. So again, I love that you say that because there's other ways that we can look at possible fungus, but your doctor or your clinician or your nutritionist has to have a pretty high index of suspicion. And just like you said, we often find bacteria or fungus or parasites or some other thing, the infectious burden contributing to that. Um, do you want to walk us through a little bit about like why something in the gut would affect the skin?
Yeah, I think just backing up to finish up what you
Sure.
said. So just to comment on that, I actually think your clinical experience is incredibly valuable, and I love that you brought up that 80% because that's what I had not heard a number that high from the dermatologist. They just said it's not very accurate to go in and get a
Uh-huh.
swab of fungus, right? And so I share that because so often we kind of get stuck with these roadblocks of like, well, I tested that. There's so many things I hate even saying out loud sometimes, or I want to give a full caveat on a podcast because, for example, if I use the words H. pylori, I'm like, my goodness, I better give a,
Yeah.
2 or 3 minute caveat here type thing.
Uh-huh.
But I will say you can go in and get swabbed right for staph, and
Yeah.
that's a little more accurate, but at the same time, even if it shows up negative and it's pretty inflamed, supporting microbalance on the surface is a really good first step. And actually, I should mention that really quickly because there's so many things that happen when people come in and present. And in a minute, if you don't mind, I'll probably
Sure.
talk about how it looks when it's more
Yeah,
gut mediated versus
sure.
other forms. And that's where,
Okay.
unfortunately, sometimes we get lost, and we could probably be a little bit more efficient in helping our clients and give them a little bit more of a realistic outlook on like how long it's going to take to resolve things. But what I was going to say is a lot of times, sometimes people come in and there's a couple scenarios. They're either ready to come in and get to work and get started, or they're like in total chaos. And I would call it like everything's on fire. They're reacting to everything, like all kinds of stuff is happening. And so there's two things I want to look at right away. I want to sort of fake it, calm down the immune system,
Mhm.
which is in the gut, right? Or I want to support that topical skin. And sorry, I got stuck up on this one,
Okay.
but it's important because if you have an infection, it's sort of like the house burning down and you're going to be trying to drywall. It just doesn't work. So
Mhm.
don't even try to go about it from a holistic
Yeah,
perspective. If you have a topical infection, it just does not work.
yeah,
It just does not work. So you've got to, if you've got, you got to kind of assess for
yeah.
infection. And the simple version is, if it looks terrible, it might be infected. If it looks oozing, if it's broken open, if it is weeping at
Yeah,
all of those are much more significant. And I use all these subjective terms. It's a
yeah,
little tricky. This is why I have people submit photos. I'm like, oh, you should go in and get this swabbed,
yeah.
or you should go in and just treat the microbes on the skin, right? Because otherwise, you're not going to be able to heal that skin barrier. And then what we want, of course, we want with skin, we want it to be simple. We want it to be external, and it's like twice as hard
Yes.
because you're dealing with the topical microbiome and you're dealing with the
Yeah.
internal, right? So if you don't mind, you asked how the gut could be related to skin issues. And when I was talking about how overgrowth in the gut grows from the inside out, right? We have this tissue on the inside and we have tissue on the outside, and it grows from the inside out. But if you don't mind, I'll frame it in a way that I think is really
Sure.
helpful for people to kind of categorizing their own eczema. So one of the problems I think with this industry is that we sort of treat it the same, right?
Hmm.
And there's pros and cons, but usually I'm talking to people because it's a con, right? Like
Yeah,
they're like, I don't really get why XYZ isn't working for me
yeah.
type thing. And so I will say that there's 3 to 4 underlying systems we're trying to bring into balance. We've already kind of given some lip service to all of them. We talked about gut and immune system, right?
Hmm.
Those two kind of are partners. We talked about drainage and detox, right? So detoxification, there's multiple detoxification organs. Drainage is a little bit bigger of a
Yeah.
conversation. We can dive into that if we want to. And then the other system to me is stress hormones. And I kind of mentioned it a little bit because that's communicating with the immune system and the gut in general. So just like there's those three systems, to me, those are the dominant areas that need support depending on how the skin is looking. So the first layer, and I think about this as like layers of a cake. And sometimes you have all three layers of the cake, and sometimes you just have one, and it's actually pretty straightforward. I would say the majority of pediatrics, not maybe the majority is an overstatement, but a lot of pediatrics, they're going to fall in kind of this first layer, which I would call gut immune mediated eczema. And that's going to look red. Unless you have darker melanated skin, it might look more gray. So it'll just change based on skin color a little bit. But for lighter toned people, it's going to be red, angry. Usually, some characteristics is that it's going to be worse in the afternoon and not in the morning. This is pretty like histamine driven
Hmm.
overall, right? So you might relate with reacting to different histamine foods. That might mean like broth or strawberries or bananas or avocados are sort of
Hmm.
flaring. Again, those are not super root cause. Those are kind of like
Yeah.
surface level symptoms. What else would be really common here? So waking up looking clearer, then you go to bed, hot water being really irritating to you, getting worse, like just generally having trouble regulating temperature, but just kind of red, rashy. And then I would say if it's presenting in circles, for
Hmm.
sure, this is also part of the conversation. It's going to be in those really typical places as well. The inside of the elbows, behind the knees, those are the classical initial places. That is just basic eczema,
Hmm. Yeah.
inflammatory gut
101.
mediated eczema. Yeah,
Yeah.
101, the most introductory level, and I would argue the simplest. So, and I would generally say also, if you've had skin stuff for less than 5 years, it would probably clear up a little bit faster. Like
Yeah.
it may clear up a little bit faster than someone who's had it for more than a decade. Okay.
Hmm.
The longer you've had it, the more layered it gets. And so, a very common story that you'll hear is I had it as a child and I grew out of it, and
Yeah.
then it came back in college or as an
Uh-huh.
adult or something. And then it becomes more layered. So, the next layer, I kind of call it environmental, but it can also be like detox or drainage
Yeah.
driven. And so, this looks like more dryness overall. So,
Yeah.
it's more like dry and flaky. It might be worse in the winter versus the summer. It's not a requirement in general, yeah, dry, flaky. I would say more reactive to chemicals. You might say like I have more sensitivity. Like you might there's so much nuance here where it's like
Yeah.
sometimes you might not say I have sensitive skin, but you've adjusted all your products to be
Yes.
fragrance
Yes,
free, right?
exactly.
Or you have a sensitivity to smells.
Right.
And so in general, why would it be dry? Because the liver is a big this organ helps with fatty acid metabolism, right? We have bile and it breaks down our fats, and then those lipids make up these nice cell membranes. And if you have all these, if that process is working well and efficiently, there's all
Yeah.
kinds of great things that happen. But one thing is that each cell membrane is going to, they'll be very nice and it's not going to be
Mhm.
dry and
Yeah.
dried out and whatnot. And so it just physiologically makes sense that at that point, okay, now we've got another system involved, and that dryness does take probably a little bit longer to
Mhm.
resolve because we're trying to support two major systems, and generally we're probably going to support both of them anyway. But now when you've added this layer, that becomes even more of a priority. You need to do additional loving on of those
Yes.
systems in order to like get to where you want to go, right? Might take a little bit longer, a little extra love, and you probably got both now you have both things. And like we already talked about, when the gut has overgrown, I love using the lawn as an example. When the gut is overgrown in weeds, you have a lot more, like, there's a lot more trash to pick up, right? Overall, like, there's more dandelions giving off more seeds. And
Hmm.
so, all that toxic, those endotoxins from the bacteria, your liver, like, your detoxification systems have to take that out too. So, as you reduce, it's sort of like a little bit of one, half a dozen of another, where it's like you start to reduce those microbes and it reduces the toxic burden, right? So
Yeah,
those two things go together.
they totally do.
Probably one of the more, probably something I like to try to correct how people start to think about it is the way we talk about detox is a little, probably not your audience, probably not the people listening to this necessarily, but we can talk about detox a little bit superficially. We
Yeah.
might say things like, "Oh, I tried to detox by eating." Someone wrote
Yes.
this to me recently. "I tried to detox by eating meat and vegetables." And I was like, "That's not the word I would use for
Right,
that."
exactly.
I suppose you're
Uh-huh.
removing toxins from coming in if you simplified to a whole foods diet, but
Yeah.
I just think that that's foundational and fundamental. When I think about detoxification, I'm sure just like you, I think about it being this machine that requires
Hmm.
all these nutrients and all
Yeah.
these things to work. And one of the reasons I have a job is that it's not quite as simple. And you know this from working with
Yeah.
lots of mold people and from having your own symptoms and your own mold stuff. If you go too hard too fast,
Yeah.
it's all going to show up on the skin. And then
I
people are
think
like,
you
this isn't
alluded
going
to
well.
this exactly, and I may say it slightly different, but I always say it's
Yeah.
mobilization and excretion, right?
Yeah.
And you're mobilizing them out of the tissues, but if your excretion pathways are blocked, then it shows up in somewhere, whether it's brain
Yeah.
fog or skin issues or whatever. So, and you can mobilize too quickly where your excretion
Yes.
route can't keep up with it.
Right. No, I love that. I love those terms. And sometimes different terms work better for
Yeah.
different people. I think sometimes drainage is
I
confusing. So
love, yeah.
I
But I
love the
love that
concept of
too. It's like,
excretion. Yeah.
exactly.
No, I love that. And so very specifically what happens, right, is if we get into things that really push on bile,
Mhm.
typically it's a nightmare and it shows
Yes.
up on the skin. And especially if there's mold history. If
Yeah.
there's mold history, it's always showing off throughout the process. Usually people will, it's more common. There's such a gamut, right? It just depends on how significant it was. And I would say my jam is mild to moderate. I'm not looking
Yeah.
for like this severe, unstable situation,
Yeah.
right? But there's a lot of education where it's like, yeah, your college house is still affecting you as an
Yes.
adult 10 years
Yes.
later. It's inside your body and it's just kind of hanging out there, thriving, right? Making you look reactive to gluten and dairy.
Hey guys, just a quick pause to remind you that you can find all kinds of great products and services at drjillhealth.com. Related to today's episode, if you're struggling with skin rashes or histamine issues, some of our favorite bestsellers are the Omega Plus 1300, which is a high potency EPA DHA, which is incredible for the skin. You can also find one of my favorite Dr. Jill Beauty products. It's kind of hard to read this, Dr. Jill Beauty Collagen. And it is a phenomenal, there we go, beauty collagen, really, really powerful improver of skin integrity, of hair, nails, all of that. So it's got the biotin that we need, but it also in there has collagen peptides, the inositol stabilized silicate and silicone, which is incredible for powerful hair, skin, nails. And I have literally, I won't go a day without this stuff. I put it in my coffee. So you can find that and other things at drjillhealth.com. And back to our show. Totally. And Krista, just as I said, I had this childhood eczema, which resolved. But then when I got the mold and the detox there, I have photos that look so horrific of my skin. And so it was, and now that I look at patients, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's mold. It's just like you, right? You can
Yeah,
see it. And I mean, my eyes would swell shut. They were crusting, my arms completely covered with rash and itching
yeah,
and all that. And it was fine because it had like a decade or two of almost no eczema. And then when that mold started detoxing from my body and my bile was sluggish, just like you said,
sucks.
yeah, and sometimes I'll show those pictures at lectures and people are like, what? Like that's you? It's pretty awful when it happens. And again, I'm sure you've seen
Oh,
people like that.
totally. Totally.
Yeah.
It is. So there's a few things that are really common that happen that I'm sure you see all the time as well. One is as you're working through this, it's easy to get a staph infection because
Yeah.
mold, once you mobilize it into the tissue, it suppresses the immune system. So you can
Uh-huh.
get sick in all kinds of ways, right? So cold sores,
Yeah.
viruses,
Yeah.
opportunistic, staph infections, more common. So
Mhm.
you have to be really like careful
Careful.
around that.
Mhm.
And then third, vaginal infections, super,
Mhm.
super common.
Yeah.
Recurrent, like bat, yeast infection,
Hmm.
BV, et cetera. All those are
Yeah.
really, really common. So those are common. And then just to talk about how it's not only dry and flaky, but if it's
Hmm.
mold,
Yeah.
it's usually showing up in lymphatic areas. So it's in the armpits,
Hmm.
it's in the groin. Um, and then you're going to see other fungal type
Yeah.
symptoms. And I'm really suspicious of anything on the scalp as well, right? Because there's
Yeah.
more fungal stuff from like the scalp up, malassezia. There's also just more lymph nodes from the shoulders
Hmm.
up. Like I think it's
Yeah.
a third of them in our body are from our shoulders up. It's like
Yeah.
bonkers,
Right.
right? So it's, I always, the hard part, no one feels this way when they're going through it initially, but the hard part is like, well, at least it's skin and not like cancer or
Yeah.
a neurological issue,
Right.
right? Because that's actually the other thing that could be triggered by
Yeah.
mold. Like all of those things can be triggered by it as well. So I attempt to like sit in gratitude as much as possible around
Uh-huh.
that, right? Which is easier to do when you've gotten farther into it. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, at least my body's giving it to me this way in a vocal place. And I will say
Right.
the tricky thing about skin is it moves us to action, right?
Yes,
It's
right.
like,
Because it's like, I remember like sitting in a car one day when I was at my worst, 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 and I'm practicing in Boulder, Colorado, and I literally was crying and I'm like, I can't go in. My face is a walking billboard of how sick I am right now. And it was like, how can people trust that I can help them if I'm like, and of course, I knew I was in the process. I was okay with it, but I just remember being at a really low point one day
yeah,
where it's like, this is the billboard. I want to be healthy and I'm working through it. But right now, this moment, I look horrible. People would like be like, "What kind of thing do you have?" And it was so depressing and discouraging. So now when I'm sure you as well have these patients or clients, I just want to be like, "Oh, sweetheart, you'll get through this." And
I
it's
know.
really hard when it's on your face or your
I
body,
know. I
right?
know. Yep, been there. And there's
Yeah.
just certain things like that image of you in your car that you
Yeah.
remember. I remember going through that journey and having trouble finding, there's so many other parts of it, right? We're having trouble finding someone who could help me at that time.
Yes.
Doing multiple stool tests and being told, like, there's nothing wrong here. I'm
Right.
like, well, there clearly
There's
is.
clearly something going
Right, there's obviously something going
on.
on. Anyway,
Yeah.
so many learning
Yeah.
experiences which were good. I attempted to be grateful, but I remember, quite a few months in, my brother saying at Christmas, like, what is on your neck? Right.
Oh,
And I imagine that this is the pain that mothers and the guilt and the shame that they go through with their babies because
yes.
so often they're out with their babies and people will come. I mean,
Yeah. Like, what
there's
are
so,
you doing?
yeah,
I mean,
there's so
I
many
have
very
two
specific.
naturopathic friends that had very severe issues with their child in the first year of life. And they were so ashamed because, again, just like me going in there as a doctor and my face is a mess, it's like this shame around, like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to know what to do. And just a normal, healthy mother who's trying to do the best for her baby, it's sad that it's that way because clearly it's not the mom's fault, although, the microbiome and all that can be playing into it. But there's a lot of shame around that.
Totally. And I think that's always the stuff that I wasn't prepared for as a practitioner for the
Mhm.
first however long,
Right.
right? It's just like the stuff that you start to realize that you need
Yeah.
to support people with, and you've got to work on your own nervous system
Yes.
so you're not
Yeah.
absorbing it, and then you can be a good mirror for them as well. So
Mhm.
there's so much, yeah, it's working with humans is a trip, right?
Yeah.
And also being a human. I always say we don't blame ourselves for being humans, right? And so
Yeah,
we're like,
it's
oh,
so
of
good.
course I have this
Yeah,
experience,
of
right?
course.
Of
It's all
course.
good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
so
get
having
back to
that
layers. I
drainage.
keep interrupting
Yeah,
you.
no, it's perfect. That's exactly how I would be. So we got that first layer, right? I consider it the most straightforward, which is a good thing, which is
Mm-hmm.
exciting. We could talk certainly about like mistakes and common pitfalls that happen there as well. The next one, right, is that drainage detox, or as you said, even excretion, and just sort of, it's all of those pieces. So what's kind of coming into the top of the funnel? How well is the machine working in
Mm-hmm.
general, and how are we going to eliminate it? And it's a little bit of an art and a science, I would say. And I don't mean that in some weird way, but this is where I feel like more of the issues kind of
Mm-hmm.
like the more layered it gets, like the
Yes.
more um, there's just certain things that are going to work better, right? And
Yes.
so when you're
Yes.
doing detoxification support, I always like to start with things that clean up after themselves, as I like
Mm-hmm.
to call them. Like so, amino acids with calcium D-glucarate, right? Like things
Mm-hmm.
that clean up. And then
Yes.
the last layer, and I think that this one is really important as we, are 5 years in now to like
Yeah.
pandemic time. That was a shift that happened where people were more broken after
Yes.
that time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so essentially, even before that time, but especially after that time,
Mm-hmm.
we were seeing more hypersensitivity
Yes.
in general,
Yes.
right?
Mast
And
cells got triggered massively by this virus, and
yes.
the immune system got suppressed. And I now say that it's an immunosuppressive virus. We see it for almost anyone, even a mild case, for a period of time. And those two things, of course, when we're talking about skin and immune system,
Mhm.
make all the difference.
Right, such a difference. So I call this layer kind of the stress driven layer, but it can, and I would characterize it by things got worse, after a really stressful event, which could be anyone, right? Or you're hypersensitive or reacting to lots of things, like everything feels like it's on fire. And the clinical presentation, I feel, is hand eczema. Now, that can be mold also very commonly. And in general, mold will generally like drive you into like
Yeah.
challenged adrenals. So it's sort of like all
All in
matters,
one. Yeah.
all matters, right? But in general as well, like there's a couple things that happened in 2020. I think that our overuse of alcohol-based sanitizers really disrupted our topical skin microbiome on the hands alone. Like hand eczema literally exploded.
Wow.
And so it allowed for different pathogens to grow. And then second, usually I see hand eczema when there is a lot of stress hormone
Mhm.
activity happening as well. So like I said, it can be mold as well, but that's kind of that top layer. And that one's tough because you use your hands a lot, right? Like where are the worst places to have eczema? Well,
Yeah.
there's multiple places that are terrible to have it, but your face and your hands are pretty
Yes.
rough, right? And you're trying to use your hands, so it's really hard to get that topical
Yeah.
skin barrier to heal overall. So one of the things I try to do there is like give as many nourishing nutrients to heal that skin barrier as fast as possible because that's kind of the worst thing and it just makes you really susceptible to more infections. Um, so those are kind of the layers overall, the things that all need to be addressed and supported, and they all look slightly different. And so what that looks like if someone comes in, and I'm sure you do this too, right? They're kind of in a couple of places, as I mentioned before. They're either kind of, okay, I have this problem, I want to address all the things, or I'm literally reacting to everything.
Mhm.
And if they're
Yeah.
literally reacting to everything, we might have to start at the top layer of the cake, right? You might have to start with like calming things down,
Mhm.
giving back nourishment to the, so what happens in those scenarios is often there's like been a lot of restriction sometimes
Yeah.
that has been there as well. So when we're over restricting for a long, especially a very long period of time, like more than a few months, um, our body initially it's like okay, and then after that it's like, hey, I already was nutrient depleted. Like I already
Yeah.
wasn't digesting well and getting nutrients, and now you want me to do all this with nothing.
Yeah.
And so it kind of, it cannot keep up. And so things get more severe. And another example of this, and this is kind of just one of those clinical things that I'm sure you've seen too, a very common presentation I see is, especially with this mold thing, is people might be kind of getting by, like things are okay, things are not falling apart, and then they go through a chronic period of stress, 1+ month of stress, and
Mhm.
then everything falls apart. They're in the same environment. Actually,
Yes.
the environment hasn't changed, but because their stress is increased and their
Yes.
nutrient, I would call the workers of their
Requirements.
systems have gone
Mhm.
down, they're not able to handle they're not able to handle it as they were before because they have reduced, they're understaffed and overworked,
Mhm.
right? And so that's essentially what happens. And so everything kind of starts to, that was barely keeping up before, just sort of falls apart. And so that's an extremely common presentation that is wonderful to recognize. Like,
Yeah.
thank God for being able to
Right.
recognize clinical presentations because then you can see people, right? And you can
Yeah.
help. It's like, oh, you actually need to put some workers back before you can do anything else.
Well, I love it, Krista, because I really feel like what you've just described to us is so clear, maybe more clear than I've ever heard anyone talk about, because there's all these things interplay and understanding kind of how, and even giving us the clinical pearls of like, it looks like this when you have this, it looks like this when you have this. I really, really appreciate your clarification. Um, so let's talk about you have the client present with one of these and you're kind of figuring out where we go with the level one, level two, level three. How are you going to approach the treatments and how would that be different among the levels?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I actually just triage into one of two
Mhm.
places.
Okay.
And so the one of two places is if you are kind of falling apart and hypersensitive, let's go in and like make sure that you've got enough workers to do the processes and let's calm down. Let's kind of, I call it fake it till you make it. Let's either cut out a topical infection and maybe calm down some things, like give you some anti-inflammatories even from the inside
Yeah.
to try to like to just try to calm it down so we can like move forward
Yeah.
essentially, right? And generally, again, the hypersensitivity it's either like a lot of nervous system dysregulation or a mold situation or whatnot. And again, it's not this horrendous thing. It's mild to moderate. So that's one. So we're coming in, we're answering a few questions. We're like, hey, did I have this, 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 and this?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I maybe should start over here. But if I am pretty stable, right?
Okay.
Like I'm not falling apart,
Yeah.
then I can probably come over here and just get started with what's going on in my gut and immune system and reducing inflammation without by correcting that kind of stuff. I call it reducing inflammation without restricting,
Yeah.
right? So, not, removing every single food from your diet. Like that's not part of anything I do anymore, which is fun. It's exciting because we don't want a healthy diet is a foundation. And digesting that food is a foundation.
Yeah.
But to restrict long term and to cause more stress is contraindicated, in my opinion, right? So anytime we're really inducing stress around somebody or people come to me and they're like, I'm literally milling my own flour and I don't want to be. I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah, yeah. So let me clarify because I want to know
yes,
what you think and see. I bet we're very much aligned. Frequently, I have people just like you who come in there on four foods. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is not
this
sustainable,
is not going to
right?
work.
But once in a while, in the very beginning, when someone is eating whatever they want, fast food, whatever, I find gluten, maybe dairy, sugar, alcohol, you have to get out because the
Yeah.
gluten, in even healthy individuals increases permeability. And I kind of want to clarify for people out there that's like, well, does that mean I can eat whatever I want? Because I do find for 60 to 90 days, often just temporarily, because once again, that's creating more inflammation. Now, I'm not talking on restricting 100 foods. And what, to your point, and I'll let you talk about your experience in just a second here, but we do these food allergy tests. I used to do them. I don't anymore. I think we align with that. And it lights up like a Christmas tree, right? And all that shows me is there's a very high degree of intestinal permeability because I would say the gut's like Swiss cheese. And so you're having reactions to everything you eat, right? Duh.
Right. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
on the same token, sugar, alcohol, processed foods, and usually gluten, sometimes dairy, and sometimes corn or another random thing
Mhm.
for a period of time really does help because you're decreasing the antigenic load till you can shore up the gut. So now tell me your input on that because I think that's important for you to understand. Sometimes, but very temporarily, not huge restriction, is important. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I'll go either way.
Yeah.
It kind of depends on what they're coming in with, and people
Yeah.
come in with a lot of emotions around food.
Yes. Right.
My end goal is
Uh-huh.
if you can tolerate gluten and dairy, I want you to live your life and enjoy those, and to know that they can be more inflammatory, and you're going to need a support thing. Like I try to set people up for the long term of
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
supportive long term.
Hmm.
So usually people are coming in on a pretty clearly awesome diet already, right?
Yeah.
But if I see alcohol, if I'm seeing other things, I may point at that. What happens most of the time? So I will share that the more restrictive someone has been, the more difficult it is for them to find a middle ground, to be perfectly
Yes. Yes.
honest. It's usually the guys who come in on carnivore. They're literally so much farther behind someone who, like, if you could have come in almost on a standard American diet and we could have cleaned things
Yeah.
up, I honestly think you would have gotten faster success than if we came in on car. And I mean, people might be kind of frustrated about that. People are really obsessed with things that are helpful. And I understand it's like you cut out all the carbs, you cut
Yeah.
out all the food for these microbes, and whatever. Like, if you're happy, be happy. That's
Yeah.
all I want for you. I just want you to be joyful.
But
But
let's,
if,
Krista, let's clarify. I love this. And I want to just clarify too. When you restrict plant-based foods and you create these micro diets of just a very small, you lose diversity in the microbiome.
exactly.
So it goes against everything you and I are trying to do
Yeah.
and to increase this resilience
It's
long term, right?
It literally takes twice as long to
Yes.
get the
Yes.
same distance as someone who's not doing that. Like I I wish that wasn't true.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. It's a bummer. So it's always good to have these conversations like this is what I'm seeing clinically. It
Yeah.
just takes longer to come back from that. There's a lot more food fear. We're finally at a stability place with I'm thinking of this one guy. He's like, I think I'm reacting to this and this and this. And it's unfortunately it was initially in a like it had good intentions and it becomes disordered or orthorexic
Yes,
sometimes
yes,
after a while,
yes.
right? And I don't
Yeah.
mean it in a negative way. It's like I really just want you to have
Well,
joy.
people
That's my
truly
goal.
get stuck in a box. And again, I
Right.
know from experience because 20 years ago when
I get it.
I was in a small little box and I'm like, I never, and now I travel and eat out and I do things that I would have never done before and I'm fine. And it's so much healthier for my
Right.
body.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I think when people come in, they are always asking me if they've been restricting gluten and dairy. Can I bring that back now? And I was like, I have no idea if you can bring it back yet
Mhm.
because you haven't done anything yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah.
really know how it's going to go. So I think that it's kind of cute, right? Because it's like mentally, I made this decision that I wanted to be able to tolerate as much food as possible. So I want to know because I made that decision if it happens now, right? And logically, we know it doesn't, but like
Yeah.
our emotions get caught up and that's
Right.
totally fine. We do not blame ourselves for being human, but
Right.
that's kind of it sort of depends on the conversation I'm having with
Yeah.
someone and like how much stress is oozing out between the cracks and what might be in best service to them in general, right? If I see that someone like all they're eating is super high histamine, and I know that is like probably the most common
Mhm.
driver, and again, both food and histamine are secondary exacerbations of a root cause going on inside of the immune
Yeah.
system generally, right? Like in
Right.
simplicity. And so if you're reacting to histamine, there's different levels and spectrums of that, right? But generally, you're not processing, breaking down, making the
Mhm.
enzymes to break down the histamine or clear it out in
Yeah.
general. However, those are and dairy fits in that category, right? That's going to be like the biggest area that's going to make the biggest impact
Yeah.
short term if people wanted to adjust their diet in general because most of people are coming in already with a clean diet. I'm not making too many adjustments. And that's a nice exhale as well.
Yeah.
So there's room for nuanced conversation. And the cool part is I can have whatever nuanced conversation they need to have about food. I speak it very fluently.
Yeah.
And I
I
just want you
really,
to enjoy
yeah.
it,
And again, I
overall.
really, that's one thing I loved about having you on is I'm like, I want to be bringing this to the forefront where people, because I see more often than not people overly restrictive, orthorexic, and being stuck. And it's not even that they want to be there, but like you
Right,
mentioned, man, you're treating, or I've had many patients like that. You've kind of feeling stuck because as you restrict, then your body reacts to more things. It's like it needs a target. So the
right.
more you restrict, it's going to find another target until you heal the gut. Now, I will also do a little caveat here because again, I have Crohn's and celiac, and I've been through this myself.
Yeah,
I eat a really clean diet. I still personally restrict dairy, gluten, and certain things, but
yeah.
I feel like I can eat a ton of stuff and I'm so much less restrictive. But I will just say, just recently, my gut is in great shape. And I was like, I think I can do some hard cheese again. I'm going to try some Parmesan. And I did it 2 days, no problem. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can have a little bit of Parmesan again. Third day, I started getting a rash really bad right around here. I'm like, okay, not yet. But I kind of want to just say that because you still
Mhm.
might have a little reaction. And I'm like, I don't need Parmesan. I'm fine without it, right? And so that's one thing that it's not worth a little rash on my face.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so for me, it's just one of those things, but it's not like I'm so restricted anymore. And to me, that's
right.
just no big deal. I don't miss it. I don't mind it. It was just fun to experiment. But there might still be people out there who still notice, gluten or
Yeah.
Parmesan or high histamine food.
Yeah. And I will also say, I think this is an important caveat because those diagnoses do usually come with a little more gravity. And often, I would say that one very, very large bucket of
Uh-huh.
humans, anyone with an autoimmune condition,
Yeah.
usually food makes a bigger difference in an
Yes.
autoimmune condition, right? So
Just,
that
I
would be
love
the
that you said
exception.
that because we have like just simple eczema, and that is something that doesn't necessarily go with celiac or Crohn's or colitis. Or so actually, that's a real important point medically. Obviously, if you're dealing with Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or any sort of inflammatory bowel issue or a severe autoimmune disease,
Mhm.
these things may make a bigger difference than Krista and I are talking
Yes.
about versus just skin. So I
Yes.
actually
I
love that we kind
absolutely
of
agree.
clarified there because yeah, my
Yeah.
situation has been much more restrictive long term, but now again, after 20 years of working on the gut, I can eat so much more than I used to.
Right. And I can also offer my own story there a little
Yeah.
bit because I did much better with grass-fed cheese and butter before I
Uh-huh.
could do anything conventional. And I did better with butter or cheese before any
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
yogurt or milk or anything like that. So there's all these layers.
Yeah.
And then as far as gluten, it's such a wide topic. It's like we want to be able to tolerate grains as much as
Mhm.
possible. But yeah, your own symptoms are helpful. It's like for the person who doesn't have autoimmune conditions, if they're having some skin breakouts from dairy, it's like, okay, is there any opportunities here? Is there anything
Yeah.
I want to do with this? Or is this just mean like this is a thing? And it's all fine. I'm a natural questioner, so I'm sort of
Yeah.
like, hmm,
What
what
if?
could I do?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what are my options? And I'm still aware of the research around gluten and permeability at the same time,
Yeah.
right? And so it's sort of like balancing life and figuring out what works best. But to that point, I'm glad we
And I'll
brought that up as
mention,
well with
when I'm
autoimmunity.
testing patients, like I'm testing number one, I test every patient with autoimmune. Do you have the genetics for celiac? And to me, that's the buckets. If you have a high risk DQ2 or DQ8 gene, you probably are going to be at more risk of inflammatory and autoimmune conditions if you eat gluten, if you choose to, even clean gluten. And then if you don't, I'm like, you're another category. If you do have an issue, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, you have a lot more broad, bandwidth to do this. And the last thing that you mentioned that I think is so crucial, quality matters.
Yeah,
Because, for example, in the US, the wheat here is usually sprayed with glyphosate. There's a lot of residues. It's a much higher gluten product. So there are tons of people who can't eat gluten as much in the US as if they go to Europe or another country, which is sad. But and grass-fed, sources of dairy or meat also, like you said, these things actually the quality does make a little difference too.
totally. It does make a difference. I know we could go have a tangent
Yeah,
about glyphosate in
I know,
general
right?
because I
Uh-huh.
I have lots of I'd like have lots of questioner
Uh-huh.
tendencies around that as well. It's like, well, why aren't we reacting to oranges and the other things we spray with glyphosate in the same way? So anyway, so many things, and we're all just trying to like live our and the thing about going to Europe, I love going to Europe and being like, why do you guys have less health issues? And I've arrived on that they're having more fun than us
Yeah.
because they're out till like 3 a.m. drinking and smoking
Yeah.
and eating late, and they are very joyful and they're
Mhm.
dancing. And so, and I have a colleague, you might know her too. I have a colleague who just got back from Europe, from Colorado also, and she's like, I swear they're just having more fun than us. That
Yeah.
must be it because it doesn't make sense to us. And
Well,
again, of
that
course, there's other
and
things too.
they have for 20 years they have it's illegal to
Yeah,
use glyphosate after like some of the chemicals that are in our food supply
right,
in there either. But agreed. They also
right,
are enjoying a 2 hour meal with no phone and no just
exactly.
like relaxing.
They are
Yeah,
digesting what they're
exactly.
eating.
So you
Absolutely.
started, I keep interrupting, but this is so
It's
fun, this
perfect.
conversation. So we started talking about like what interventions. So let's go back to kind of wrap it up with like what are we doing for these clients that are, that you said kind of level one and level two, and you kind of differentiate them immune
Yeah,
system. Yeah.
right. So I always like to oversimplify a complicated topic.
Mhm.
And so that's why I'm coming in and triaging like, what are your op like, do we really need to overcomplicate it into three? And I said no,
Yeah.
because the gut immune system and drainage and excretion they're both they're both major systems, but they tie together so much. They like interplay so
Yeah.
darn much. I mean, everything interplays so much. But usually you can come in and start to work on, because again, the skin is a drainage organ. So even if you have like the first layer, right, the most basic eczema going on, you might still need a little bit of drainage support. It's just that when you have that second layer, you're probably going to need more of it for longer
Yeah.
is the bottom line. And so what when they come in and go to like step one, which is like, well, come in and let's work on gut immune system and drainage detox as the first line therapy, instead of going over here to make sure that you literally have enough to even function and calm down the freak out other stuff, right? Because that's really essentially when someone's in front of you, it's like, and if people come to me from other practices, that's sometimes what's not being necessarily addressed, right? This other like, hey, I'm reacting to everything. This
Yeah.
isn't working. I can't do this. And it's like, oh yes, that's because we have to calm everything down
Yeah.
first before we can do
Yeah.
anything else. So one of two places. So if you're coming into that first, and by the way, if they start in like, hey, I got to calm everything down, it's just slightly more scenic. They're going to come back to the step one as well,
Yeah.
like no
Yeah.
problem. And so then they're going to come in and support what's going on gut and immune system, drainage, detox, kind of in a layered order as well. Like each of those has at least three layers overall of how you're going to support that in general. So that way we're not dumping too much on the skin, etc. And if they're the person who has that drier stuff, as I just mentioned, there's more opportunities to lean into what's going to really support that cell membrane, what is going to work first, second, third. I don't usually do anything that's bile moving until month 3 with an eczema client because I see so
Too much
much,
there.
even mild mold history, that I'm not interested in hearing that your skin got worse. I just want it to get better as much as possible.
Mhm.
So if you move bile too much, it's like this soapy stuff that like cleans things out and it's gonna move, it's like sweeping it out. I always describe it as, it's like cleaning under the stove in the fridge, but the rest of the kitchen floor isn't really clean enough yet. So it's like it's just overflowing the dustpan. And so we want to wait until we've gotten farther along and then we can kind of get under there and get more out. And the more of that we do, the better we feel, right? The more we wake up with like better energy.
Mhm.
We don't have creaky joints. Maybe we start to tolerate dairy, sans
Yes,
autoimmune
yes,
stuff, right? Those are the
yes.
things that can happen as we start to clear that up more and more and more. We have better periods, right? We have less cramping, all of those things, less heavy bleeding,
So
etc.
cell membrane support, give us your top three things that you'd want to include as nutrients, or maybe top five.
Yeah, so I have a whole kind of handout on this, and there's like an interplay. So I'm just thinking about overall nutrients that help support cell membrane. So you can do high dose omegas, and I think that I like to be at very therapeutic dosages of this. And so one of the conversations around omegas in general is we're just sort of trialing this. So I love to trial 4,000, and this is nice because it's like generally going to work as long as there's no fish
Mhm.
allergy. It's usually not a big issue. So 4,000 total omegas for an adult for at least 2 to 3 weeks to see a slight difference in dryness. I would say you're going to see a difference in more systemic dryness versus like if I had a little patch and it was kind of dry, that might actually be the healing process
Mhm.
happening in that small place. So more systemic. How my brain thinks about this, I have like a slow fads gene. So I don't convert plant-based ALA into animal-based EPA and DHA. And so I just generally suck at having good quality, like these omega-3 fatty acids, unless I'm
Good diet.
taking them in from salmon or cod.
Mhm.
My favorite fish is black cod or sable
Mhm.
fish. And so if I'm not taking those in, I might be a person who's like a little more dry in the winter. I, this is kind of funny. This is like will tell you my personality. I'm too lazy to use lotion, so I'm like, hey, my skin's dry. I better be hitting my cell membrane
Uh-huh.
support, my omega
Yeah.
threes. But that's how my brain works. It's like, oh, my skin is drier. I need to go in and like cycle in some support. In general, another little thing to keep in mind is that inflammation naturally uses up omegas, and so it's going to compromise that cell membrane structure. And so, in general, like it makes sense that you would have to cycle that in at different times of life in general. So, like if you're working out and like breaking out muscle and inducing inflammation. So, I just want to make those caveats because I think those are important details that are kind of good pearls for all of us in life.
Mhm.
So, I'm going to consider that, but I don't automatically do that all the time. And I like to be considerate of the fact that like that's expensive. So, I like to go in, see if it's making a difference, and then move on and try something different as well. I like vitamin E. I like tocotrienol
Yeah.
form of vitamin E, annatto E, but most of the literature around that is kind of long term. So there's a product from Quicksilver called Membrane Mend that's kind of awesome. That's like a little phospholine and
Yeah.
vitamin E. It's a little lower dose. I wouldn't give it if I know there's a bunch of mold right away, but I do
Yeah.
that. Um, I am obsessed with phospholine, probably because I have a
Mhm.
PEMT
Yes.
um,
Uh-huh.
genetic variation as well. So I do great with choline. I think this is an interesting topic my brain likes to play with as well. My mom has an autoimmune condition where she doesn't like acetylcholine receptors don't work very well. So I just think it's like
Yeah.
interesting, right?
Totally.
Overall. So anyway, I love choline. I think it's like the best thing ever. And then from there, it's going to be kind of combinations of those different things. Like I'll maybe use cod liver oil, but you've got to take a lot more cod liver oil to get those types of omegas. So those are going to be the things that I find work best for people. But the tricky thing about phosphatidylcholine is because it's a bile mover, it's
Mhm.
not an initial thing to be using. If you add
Agree.
that too soon, people are going
Yeah.
to freak out and it's going to be an issue.
Yeah.
I don't even get into stuff like TEDCA typically. I know it's really commonplace, but like it causes too many issues in my
Mhm.
kinds of clients. And so I go from a much smaller, like a bile support. And so when I talk about cell membranes, I'm like, okay, there's a bunch of nutrients here,
Yeah.
and these different nutrients like also flirt with other topics. They also
Yes.
wear other hats, is what I'm saying. And so, what supports the cell membrane can also support detoxification. And that's the beauty of nutrients
Yes.
or herbs or other things is like they don't just do one thing, they actually do multiple things. And it's a magic of stacking it and layering it at the right time so it's handled by the client best so they get the best results the most efficiently. I mean, that's like kind of the magic that takes
Hmm.
time to figure out, right?
Yeah.
Overall.
Very well put, because I could not agree more. PC at the wrong time is terrible. At the right time, it's magical. It's like
Yeah.
it's really amazing. So, oh my goodness, I can't believe we're almost at the hour because we could talk for no another hour. You are such a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate your balanced approach because I do believe a lot of people are just getting into these boxes and getting stuck and then feeling so hopeless and so restricted and so depressed, and they're not getting omegas for their brain function and everything else.
Right.
So I actually love that you're bringing this model and this view to the world of skin health. Um, what maybe we'll just end with like maybe a client story or a situation where you felt like there was like, wow, this is really severe and there was success. Any thoughts on maybe sharing with us a little vignette of someone who really did a good job of improving in a case where they were just hopeless or felt like there was no way they could get out of it?
Yeah, I actually was just writing case studies
Oh,
last week. So there is this client, I'm going to call her Shelly, and what I love about this is that she told me not very long ago, she said, "Oh, I didn't tell my husband about working with you," which I thought was, I had no problem with, but it was just like, she's a really beautiful soul, sandwiching. And I love the human perspective. Like, I actually like to know the people,
yeah.
right? And so she's like literally caring for her aging parents, and her kids are, growing, but she's
Yeah.
kind of sandwiched between them. And she's had stuff going on for 20 years, and she had tried to see different people for different things. And I can't exactly remember the result, but essentially she came out and was like, I'm reacting to these things. I'm like
Mhm.
hypersensitive. And
Yeah.
so the reason I like this story is because I call, I always say, like, if you're in that place, usually the route is going to take just a little bit longer. It's going to be slightly more scenic. You're going to need to go support yourself before we can go back and get some of the other
Yeah.
work done. But what I loved was she went in to just give herself the supportive stuff to calm inflammation down, to put nutrients and workers
Mhm.
back in so the systems could work well on their own. And she improved like 63% in
Wow.
like 4 to 6 weeks before she even got back to that first phase. And she went
Yeah.
really slow. But
Uh-huh.
I was like, it's so fun to see that and to see how her brain was processing through the information as well. I
Yeah.
can really tell, like, when I'm looking at people's data and having conversations with them, how well it's all jiving for
Yeah.
them. And how my goal now, there's so much nuance in how I'm working now because I got like a different conversation for another day is like things that aren't working in functional medicine for me anymore. And so I started to want to
Hmm.
solve for that. Like,
Yeah.
people feeling dependent on you forever was
Yeah.
feeling not good to me. And so I was like, how can we get you through this and feel really empowered and like you know how to stand on your own 2 feet
Hmm.
at the end of it? Like,
Yeah.
and how you know how to ask your own questions to get your own really good answers, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what I want for you, because I don't want to be your yes man
Yeah.
forever, right? Like, but I want for you this freedom. And
Yeah.
then it's sort of, there's a lot all tied into this. And so anyway, I can see that she's synthesizing it so beautifully. And so that was like, between 4 and 6 weeks, she was 63% better. And then she had something that happened. She was just 50% better. But like her skin was like, and she wrote recently, she said, I really feel like this is going to work. Right. And it's like she's
Yeah.
dealing with so damn much at
Yeah.
home. Right. She's dealing, like, there was so many other layers and like things and crazy things that had happened. But what I love is like so I'm always so impressed with how even the supportive angle can make such a big difference
Yes.
for somebody before we get back to the other things that we're
Yeah.
so good at in functional medicine, right? But it's like, what if I just gave her the nutrients to make her systems work well in the right order for someone with her context, and like
Yeah.
what kind of magic will happen at the beginning, right?
That's
And
a
so,
great case because often it really is like clearly when you sit with a client, just listening, understanding, and giving them the support for them to believe that something else is possible. That right there is the power of the beginning of the healing process, isn't it?
yeah. I love her so much. And it's like we have our how we communicate is kind of funny and interesting. Like, it's a lot of written communication just because she's too busy for
Yeah.
whatever. But it's like I give people the option to do multiple things, one-on-one, seeing me for Q&As, like all of these options to like do what works best for
Yeah.
you. I'm gonna proactively check on you no matter what,
Hmm.
right? And because I don't want you to fall off the wagon, right? Like, ideally. And so, and it's just beautiful when like I see her synthesizing this
Yeah.
stuff, even though life is hard, and she's like, oh, I see it. Like, I'm getting these little things. It's like work. And it's really, she's inspiring to me. I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean,
You
you're
can
like
do
my
that.
hero. Like, you're the best, right?
I
And
know.
that's the stuff that I think, we love as providers. Is like,
Yeah.
getting to know the real human
Yeah.
is actually the fun part. Like I do love quality over quantity still.
Mhm. I could not agree more. Krista, you have been a incredible source of knowledge today, and I know people will be inspired and they'll probably want to find you. Where can they find you? Where can they find your work if they want to work with you? Where do we
Yeah,
go?
if you're listening to this podcast, you listen to podcasts, and I have a nerdy podcast as well. It's called The Less Stress Life, which was a very accidental title. I was looking for a synonym for inflammation in 2017. That was the best I could come up with, but it's been a wonderful umbrella. It's like stress
Awesome.
is literally the go,
Yeah.
like it's like the umbrella of inflammation, but it lets me talk about lots of topics. So I'm happy for that. And then you can always find me over at christabigler.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today and the work you're doing in the world. It was such a pleasure to interview you. Hey, everybody, wasn't that a great interview with Christa Biegler? I hope whether you have inflammation on the skin or in your body, or you know someone who does, I hope it was helpful and informative. I really enjoyed getting to know Christa better and talking with her. As always, we have new episodes out every week, so be sure and stay tuned. If you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and join the over 700,000 subscribers that have already subscribed to our podcast. If you're out on any of the audio platforms, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to podcasts, would you stop by and leave us a review? It really helps us to reach more people. And as always, you can find anti-inflammatory, antihistamine products and services at drjillhealth.com. And I will see you again next week for a new episode of Resiliency Radio.